Recording has started. All right, there we go. Let me just shut off the transcription because I really don't need to see every word that I say. All right, well, welcome to live discussion number 2. I was joking earlier that I'm glad to see I'm in the right discussion this week, which is a little embarrassing way to start the course, but you'll have that. And I did go through and edit all the rest of them, so hopefully that should not happen again. I'm teaching medical terminology this summer too for the first time in a really long time, and I'm having all kinds of edits there as well. So in any case, the more things I edit, the more things required editing. So today's conversation is about ethics and confidentiality, and really just thinking about how the Code of Ethics for Health Education Specialists applies specifically to health coaching. And I think it's not very difficult to think about how that might apply. Um, Obviously, most professions are looking at doing things in ethical ways, um, in ways that don't interfere with other people in ways that would be problematic, right? And so the Code of Ethics for Health Educators, Article 1, has the core ethical expectations, right? And so the very first one is that we display personal behaviors that represent the ethical conduct, principles of honesty, autonomy, beneficence, respect, and justice. And that under no circumstances, this one's kind of obvious, I think, do we engage in derogatory language, violence, bigotry, racism, so on and so forth. I think one of the big ones that folks will struggle with is number 2, that we respect and support the rights of individuals and communities to make informed decisions about their health, as long as such decisions pose no risk to the health of others. And that one can be a little tricky, right? Because where does what we do stop affecting other people? You know, I can remember being a early master's student and having this conversation and saying, well, why is it anyone else's business if I'm wearing my seatbelt or not, right? How does that negatively affect somebody else? And someone said, well, because if you're having a car accident and I have to witness you go flying through the windshield, that might be problematic for me. There are some obvious ones, right? Things like smoking in public places, in our cars with our children, and our houses or apartments with roommates, in public spaces with other people who might not choose to want to breathe in that smoke, right? In Ohio, we're still sort of wrestling with the idea about reproductive choices. Obviously, some of those decisions have consequences for the folks around us. You know, whether or not we let someone know if we have a sexually transmitted infection, or what we might choose to do with an unwanted or unplanned pregnancy. So risk and health of others can be a dotted line or fuzzy line, right? Sometimes where we have to try to fully figure out what exactly that means. The rest are kind of easy, honest about our qualifications and the qualifications of others. I find in general, there's a lot of folks out there calling themselves health coaches, some of whom are qualified and some of whom are not. I have disciplinary snobbery, right? As a community health person and as a health education specialist, health coaching falls within the demographics of our discipline and our profession. But there's plenty of people out there practicing what they call health coaching, with maybe some, online certificate or whatever. And I equate it to personal training, right? Because I work in the School of Health Sciences, where I work with exercise physiologists and exercise scientists who also talk about, there are certain ways, all kinds of ways to be a personal trainer. Some actually involve, extensive amount of education and anatomy and physiology and muscles and aerobics and, I didn't mean aerobics, but like, the physiology of aerobics, so on and so forth. And then again, there are folks that kind of like to hang out at the gym, right? And have cute little workouts, and then probably also malpractice and talk to folks about nutrition, though they don't have a registered dietetics credential. So that can be a little bit tricky, but at least most of us in our field are appropriately prepared, though I have found some of our students and my colleagues, frankly, they're lacking in the appropriate disposition to do the work. So we'll talk about those as we go throughout. Number 4, I think, is the most relevant to our conversation today. Health education specialists are ethically bound to respect the privacy, confidentiality, and dignity of individuals and organizations, right? And it goes on to talk about holding diverse values, attitudes, and opinions, that we generally are, that we have a responsibility to engage generally in supportive relationships that are free of exploitation. Um, so privacy, confidentiality, those are part of our conversation today, right? Because generally what we talk about with clients are things that we keep private, which would be very different from confidential, right? So confidential would be lacking anonymity, but means that we generally are not sharing that information or context or content with other people. And that line of confidentiality can also be a little bit tricky depending on what the person might be disclosing. So, for example, as an employee of a public institution, I am held to Title IX, just as one example. So, should a student disclose an incident of sexual violence or discrimination or harassment, I am federally required to let the Title IX office know that that happened. And then, what happens after there is variant depending on what the individual actually wants. But I was sitting in a meeting at one time, way back in the day when Bobby Brown was our Title IX coordinator, and he was saying, even if a student is saying that this thing happened to them, back in the third grade or whatever, we still have an obligation to report that to Title IX. Again, this idea that the university needs to provide resources to our community such that everyone's supported through, in this case, a sexual violence incident. Generally, in a helping situation, confidentiality is breached when a person poses a risk to themselves or others. So usually those are suicide ideations, right? So if a person is expressing self-harm intentions, and we'll talk about that more as we go throughout the course, because that can be very serious and can be a little tricky to handle. It's not my favorite thing to do, though I have a lot of folks in my life that struggle with mental health in those kinds of ways. So I've been there. Um, but even with students and with clients, right? And so often folks are expressing, oh, I just hate this, or, using casual language, right? I just want to kill myself. And it's, we have to then ascertain whether or not that's a real risk or whether or not it's just an expression that someone has used. And I try really hard in my own life to try not to use expressions like that because the power of them is important. And I think that it's important that we maintain that power for when we really mean those things rather than when we're just sort of, you know, uh, flying off about something that we're upset about. Okay. And so then what was the other? Oh, or harming somebody else. And so generally those are, at least in my space where I'm a mandated reporter, children's services or adult protective services issues, right? When we find out that someone is not living very well or is in danger in some way, then that also becomes a mandated reporting situation. And ethically, I choose, and I think it's important, but not necessarily everybody's practice, to let people know where those limits are, and then also to let them know, unfortunately, now that you have expressed this, I need to let you know that I have to report this to, and then whatever is going to happen. I think it's important for people to have clear communication. And again, that one can be really tricky to let someone know, like, now that you've said that, I have to, and then sometimes it's walk you over to the counseling office or find you um, some resources, or now I have to report this to Children's Services or Adult Protective Services or Title IX, right? And so then it's been important to me in my professional career to educate myself about what exactly those requirements are, so I can let that person know, what is about to take place and what their options are still at that point. So there's where I think I like or not, I think, there's where I do like to implement the ABCDE ethical framework that's available for you in this module. Because it's at least those 5 questions that we can pause and ask ourselves with regard to what is it exactly that we need to be doing here, right? So the assessment, or the A, right, is thinking about, so what exactly did this person just say? right? And kind of like I said earlier, did they say just like, oh, I just want to die as an expression, or are they actually trying to tell me that they're struggling in a way that might need help, right? Or um, whatever it is that they've said, what is their mental state to the extent that I can clarify? And here, when we're thinking about suicide, everything that I learned about suicide prevention is from one of our best faculty colleagues who sadly passed away last month, Dr. Jason McLaughlin, who taught me the PIMP version, right? Which is what we'll use in this class, where we assess whether or not the person has a plan, the intention, the means, and then previous attempts. And we'll look at more of that as we move forward. It's a little early in the course to be talking about that just yet, but there again, where then you have to say like, oh gosh, you just want to die. Is that something that you're just saying, or is that, are you really feeling like taking your life is a viable option right now? And we'll get into the details of that further when we go through. But that second part, like, is medical consultation necessary? It's often that I'll call Dr. Miller over at the counseling center because I'm a EHHS person. That's where we start. And I'll say, hey, Jason, I've got this student, or I've got this colleague, or I met with so and so, and I'm concerned in these ways. And then as a licensed professional counselor, I can get from them, yeah, that sounds like you definitely need to bring them over, or we'll be right there to get them, or, give them our resources and we'll check in, we'll connect them to the care team, so on and so forth. I mean, working at a university like ours is an immense privilege because we have so many research support services available for folks. Resources is what I was trying to say, so that we can try to figure it out. And the other one is harming someone else. And I've mentioned child protective services as well as adult protective services, but, thinking about like homicide, and I don't know why I laugh when I say that, or worried about persons as like active shooters, right? Or we're finding it more common to find people's like manifestos or threats on their social media. And younger generations, which is a lot of you, would fall into that category, at least younger than my generation, have sadly grown up with a much more experience in those kinds of things. And so hopefully you've at least received your Alice training from our campus, or some other kind of training that helps you not only learn how to survive those episodes, but perhaps even some deeper training that will help you learn to look for those red flags, so that if you see something, you can say something in a way that might hope to prevent those kinds of things. I think it's also important, and notice the third part of that assessment is to think about what we're feeling. What are our values? What are our reactions to the disclosure? Are we being triggered inappropriately by something? We all have traumas and scars from our histories that might be leading us. I come from a long line of domestic violence and different kinds of abuse, and I do have a very sensitive receptor to sexual violence, just as an example. So I often have to check myself, right? And I have to say like, wow, that is like firing off alarms in my brain that this person is maybe in trouble. Is this just something that's like outside of my comfort zone in a way that I don't understand? Like, I can remember watching a family member kiss their father on the lips, and I knew that that person, the man, was a sexual abuser of several folks in my family. And so it just, again, it kind of like, oh gosh, is something different going on here? And again, we were all adults in that regard. And so I just had to like push back a little bit myself away from the situation and try to see, is this my business? Is this something I need to get involved with or not? And I don't know if there's anything harder um, than having to call like children's services to start some kind of protection scenario, because it just can be very, very traumatic. I'm having a, a moment because yesterday I was watching Taking Care of Kate or something. I don't know. It was a documentary on Netflix, brand new, about a young girl who had a medical issue, and the hospital called Children's Services, and it was just a terror. I was like sobbing by the end of it. My spouse was like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I don't know. I think I just needed to cry." And just the powerlessness and the enormity of what happened to that family was like a lot to carry. But in any case, so right, those were my feelings though, and values and reactions. And that's one of the reasons I have y'all do the implicit bias assessment. And everybody gets a little frustrated with it generally. Someone will say, and it's Harvard. So, Harvard is Harvard. But that assessment has been statistically validated over decades. And maybe not decades, but tons of iterations of the survey. So it actually is good. And it's not meant to hurt our feelings, right? Because you go through some of them and you're like, I don't hate thin people or heavy people or people of whatever, right? Whatever assessment you chose to take. I don't have problems with them. And it's like, how could you not? We grew up, many of us, in a culture in which othering people and shaming people for who they are and how they feel or how they live is kind of a normal cultural thing. Not something that we're always proud of, but something that we're constantly engaging in. This is Pride Month, for example. And often those of us members of the queer community also experience internal homophobia. If we were raised like I was in the 70s and 80s, where, you didn't want to be gay, or, we said all kinds of things that we don't say anymore that are inappropriate, or, thought more universally to be inappropriate. We still have those messages inside of our heads. And that brings us to, if we look at the suicide attempts and ideations among youth, particularly trans youth, but LGBTQ, AI plus youth, they have sometimes 6 times the suicide ideation of their similar aged peers, right? Because they just are in a situation where they really genuinely feel like it's better for them to be dead than to live their lives. And Ohio's not a safe place in that regard. We have all kinds of bills currently going after people of different identities and things of that nature. The United States in general right now seems to be struggling with our trans community acceptance. And so that implicit bias, like I said, it's not meant to make you feel bad about yourself or like you're a bad person. I think it's contrary, actually. It's really important that we know what those messages are in our head so we can stop them, right? I mean, having a thought, a transphobic or an Islamophobic or a whatever, right? Thought in our head, some kind of bias in our head isn't the problem. The problem is when we don't take the moments that are necessary to intellectually think about that and then act in our behavior in a different way. Right. And so thinking about, gosh, I just had this feeling about this person. I feel unsafe or less safe, or I feel, negative towards this person. Is this really about them, or is this about me? Right. And learning to check our own thoughts is something I think that can be very valuable and can help us learn to navigate and negotiate differences with each other. And also really take that moment to check and see if what we're thinking or feeling is valid, right? Whether it's our own reaction, and hopefully someone along the way taught you to like trust your gut, right? But at the same time, to recognize that you aren't always perceiving everything as accurately as you could, because all of the different schemas and lenses and our own experiences might be coloring and maybe even concealing or projecting, onto the situation things that might be slightly different from what's actually happening. So it's just that check, right? How is this person? How am I? Again, am I, if this is a personal relationship with a person, sometimes we ignore some of those things, right? And I think survivors of suicide are folks from whom I've learned a lot as I'm trying to navigate the folks in my life that every now and then are feeling suicidal. Where are those pieces that we might have caught something, which again is not to blame anyone, because often folks will say like, gosh, I never saw this coming. There weren't warning signs. And we'll talk more about that, because not everybody who attempts or completes a suicide is going to give us the opportunity to intervene. So something to think about. All right, the B is for benefit, right? And so if I'm thinking like, gosh, I need to call someone, or I need to disclose, or I need to confront this person, then I have to think about like, All right, what is, if we think about beneficence, right, or the greater good for most people in the society, what are the benefits by me acting or not acting, right? I mean, if I call Adult Protective Services, or if I reach out to this person and with the care team, right? I'll have faculty sometimes, they're like, well, I don't want to sick the police on them. And I said, well, the care team is really not the police. They're on there, right? But often we'll just do a wellness check, let's say on a student who might have, disclosed some things and then maybe not been in class, or, things that we're just worried about. Again, I'm biased. I've been here for 26 years and I work with a lot of the support staff, but I do think that we're not perfect, but that we have an immense amount of supportive resources and folks that are genuinely interested in everybody's individual well-being. And so I think those things can be important. How might, the community around this person benefit? How might I benefit, right? And what's going to be the greatest benefit for the most people? And so what are all those pieces that we're thinking about in terms of what's the upside of doing this? Consultation, I think, can be really important. And I have a support network of folks where if I'm having to deal with a complicated issue, sometimes it's even just like writing an email that's not offensive, right? Or not going to make the situation worse. I have several different folks that I'll say, hey, can you take a look at this? Or, hey, I'm having this issue and these are my concerns and I'm not sure if, right? And so looking to see, again, what might the ethical pieces that I'm not thinking about be, or legal or emotional, for everybody involved, right? And I will always like tell my boss, my school director, like, hey, I chatted with this student. They don't seem to be real happy. I just want you to know I sent them to you, kind of thing, right? To sort of help me figure this out. Or like I said, I'll touch base with Dr. Miller over in the counseling center, or Dr. Amy Quinlan, who's our student ombuds, to just say like, hey, Amy, I'm a little concerned about this situation with this student, or this student is not happy with me in this course, or with their advisor in a different capacity, whatever it is, right? So what exactly, and Dr. Quinlan is super awesome at knowing all the university policies and, again, ways in which we can support people. And that can often, though, I'm tenured, so I do have academic freedom, but I still am in line with university policy and, my collective bargaining agreement, so on and so forth. But I think it can also be really important to know your employer's position, right? How do they deal with things? If you're going to be working in a school versus a hospital or a government organization or a nonprofit, there's going to be different community values and expectations with regard to who are you supposed to tell and when, right? And sort of what is that, for lack of a better word, like the chain of command, so to speak, right? Is there someone else you should check with before you make that move? And I've yet to have to like consult an attorney, though I have consulted with university attorneys a couple of times, just to say like, hey, how do we do this, right? How do we get through this? And that one I think is similar to deed, but duty is again sort of where are you going to align yourself in this space, right? And so, what do I owe the client? What do I owe my own professional self? Culture, society, the legal system, right? If I let this person out of my office and I'm concerned that they're going to harm someone else, or that they're harming themselves, or that they're, so let's just say they're under the influence and they're driving away from here, how can I best act to protect not only that person, but other people on the street, so on and so forth, right? So, and that can be complicated as well, because then we have to figure out, and I talk about this often, it makes me sound a little like not all here, but I'm okay with that. Mostly I'm okay with who I am, that sometimes I'm acting as Dr. Wagner, right? Sometimes I'm acting as Lori, right? Trying to figure out like to whom exactly, am I here right now for Kent State? Am I here right now for the discipline of health education specialists? Am I here right now as a sexual health educator, as a wife, as an aunt, as a sister, as a friend, as a colleague? Like, what exactly is my role here? Because those are all me, right? But those people act very differently. Even with my spouse, sometimes I'm acting in a spousal role, which I think is a little bit different from, acting as that person's like best friend or, the other person that lives in my house with my family, right? And so those can be a little bit different roles sometimes. And so figuring out, to whom is my duty most eminent or most prominent in this situation. And then the last one, and unfortunately, we just never stop learning. And maybe that's fortunate. I don't know. The last one is, do I need to know some more? So, do I need to consult my code of ethics? Do I need to look at, consult my professional board? Do I need to, again, talk to the union or talk to somebody who's an expert in policy? Is there more that I need to know about this? And again, I probably have a bias as someone that works in higher ed. I really do believe that education is very important and something that I'm highly committed to and that I'm never done with, right? That there's always something else that I'm having to try to figure out or try to tweak about myself or try to do differently or better. And, we say that when we know more or better, we do more or we do better. And that to me is something that I do take seriously. And it's disappointing when we have to learn stuff, right? Or we make mistakes. Like Canvas, these learning management systems are always that like, this assignment's not right. Or last week I'm in the wrong discussion, right? Those are simple things versus big deal kinds of things. Like, do I know enough about this to really be the best person to help this person? Or and we'll continue to talk about that, the lines of our professional boundaries and discipline. As a sexual health educator, people often are like, well, what do you think is the best form of contraceptive? Or what do you think I should do about this pregnancy or in this relationship? And those are huge questions. And most of you here are here because you want to be helpers. And we'll talk about that shortly, why we don't give advice, even though a lot of you will try, will say generally like, oh, but I'm the best at that. My friends all come to me for advice. And I'm hoping to help refine the ways in which you deal with that. Again, because when we think about the advice we give and the weight of that, it'll play directly with our code of ethics. So, all right, well, that brings us to, I'm a little bit over actually, but I'm talking to myself. Sometimes I think I have the most fun when I'm talking to myself, which is not true, but there's nobody to stop me or make me pause. So in any case, all right, so just a quick reminder just about content stuff. So most of you shared your links with me this morning for your video, your first video, which is your introductory video. So those are already ready for you to go on that first playlist. And we're going to start working on video number 2. If you're having trouble finding a partner, feel free to join up with someone in the class. I put that on the discussion board. Unfortunately, doing them by yourself is not an option moving forward. And there's not that many of you, so you could team up, or I'm happy to join you if you want to. If that doesn't make you nervous, it shouldn't. And you can do those virtually as well. Something good we learned over the pandemic is that you can actually do a video chat should you want it to complete it that way. I've also taken a look at your logs. And those of you who are in the room today have already earned your points for the live discussion. Because I messed up last week, that one got a little bit messy, but keep in mind, you can only earn 6 points for each discussion, and you're either going to earn it by showing up either passively without your camera and not participating in the discussion, but just listening, or actively, which I encourage you to do because continuing to just listen to me is going to get annoying to you. And or just follow up with the discussion questions. And that is going to mean that the live discussion, those of you who are here will get those 6 points automatically and then not be assigned the discussion, and then vice versa. Those of you who go to the discussion are going to get those 6 points there, and then you will, at least temporarily, for discussion 1, it'll be for everybody. You'll retain that 0, which means nothing. You've still earned your 6 points, but I know Canvas is a little elementary. It likes to tell you what percentage, which is not helpful. So don't feel like that's negatively affecting your grade because it's not. Ultimately, we're just going to look at those points, right, and keep adding up those points to compare that to the point scale on the syllabus. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Thanks to those of you who joined me today. I hope to see some of you in the next live discussion. And as always, I'm here every day if you need anything. So take care. Have a great Tuesday, and I will talk to you again soon. All right, stopping now.